A warm welcome to this event. First of all, welcome to the speakers who are joining us in person here at the Danish Parliament, Christiansborg, and welcome to all of those who are streaming this event on the Danish Parliament TV. I'm representing the Social Liberal Party, and we have also on Teams Mr. Bertel Haarder from the Liberal Party, and we hope other MPs will join us. This is a joint event by members of the Danish Parliament's Committee on Gender Equality, the Rahela Trust, and Danish Refugee Council's Diaspora Program. My name is Samira Nawa. I'm, as I said, member of Danish Parliament, and I will guide you through the next hour and a half. We are here today to exchange experiences and views on the current situation in Afghanistan after the takeover of the country by the Taliban. I myself, as some of you may know, have Afghan roots since my parents, they are originally from Afghanistan. And although I'm born and raised here in Denmark, I can say that I've never felt my Afghan roots as strongly as I did the August the 15th this year. As mentioned, we're here to exchange experiences on the current situation in Afghanistan. And addressing the current situation is not done in one day. There is a lot that could be discussed: the economic situation in Afghanistan, the situation for the Hazara minority, who are an ethnic and religious minority in Afghanistan, or it could be the situation for Afghan women and girls in Afghanistan. And today's event will concentrate on the last. The aim is to provide the Afghan diaspora women a platform to explain the situation on the ground from their point of view, voice their concerns, and start a dialogue with members of the Danish Parliament on how to protect girls and women in Afghanistan, as well as those seeking protection outside of Afghanistan. In short, in this event, we will discuss on following 3 points. First of all, how can Denmark ensure that the gains from the last 20 years they are preserved and that women and girls can enjoy their full rights. Secondly, how to respond to the humanitarian crisis with the specific needs of women and girls in mind. And thirdly, how women and girls at risk can access protection outside of Afghanistan. To begin with, we have 2 opening remarks. The opening remarks will be followed by a panel of Afghan women, experts to help us make sense of the developments in Afghanistan, in particular the consequences on Afghan women. But first of all, let me introduce Ms. Shanna Jensen, Executive Director from Danish Refugee Council's operation in the Middle East, Europe and Asia. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Samira Nawa, and thank you very much for organizing this very, very important event. And a warm welcome to everyone participating online for this event. I'm very happy that you're allowing me to start with my first address, because in DRC we are very, very pleased that this event is materializing, as we believe that it's key to provide a space for a frank discussion between Afghan women, some sitting on my right-hand side, and members of the Danish Parliament on this unfolding humanitarian situation in Afghanistan and its impact on women and girls in particular. So we look very, very much forward to this discussion today on ways to promote, protect, and uphold women's rights, and particularly under these very difficult situations in Afghanistan. The situation is deteriorating. We are receiving increased reports about gender-based violence and sexual exploitation. Early marriages will likely also increase, with devastating impact on girls as the situation becomes more desperate on the ground. These problems are not new, but are exacerbated by the current situation, and with the suspension of education for girls at the upper secondary level, the perspective is increased dependence and lack of livelihood opportunities for women and for the building of future local capacities in the country. the Taliban takeover had major consequences for civil society and national NGOs and their ability to operate in Afghanistan, and especially for women-led organizations. Several have already stopped work. It will mean additional immediate and major unmet needs that we cannot continue if they cannot continue operating. DRC, the Danish Refugee Council, we have been present in Afghanistan since 1999. Our intervention focuses on emergency assistance support, multi-purpose cash assistance, early economic recovery and protection activities. DRC is one of the largest NGOs in the country with more than 700 staff. Nearly a third of our staff in Afghanistan are women, and we, along with many other organizations, remain committed to a principled humanitarian approach by which the resumption and continuation of our program is contingent upon the ability for our female staff members to resume working in the same capacity as they have done previously, to be able to identify needs among women and girls in a safe and culturally sensitive way, to prevent and respond to gender-based violence, to be able to provide basic health and other services, which is only possible with safe and unhindered access for female staff. Since August 15, as you just mentioned, progress has been made on this issue, and we have been able to reach verbal agreement with local representatives of the governing authorities in 11 out of 18 provinces in which we have a permanent presence at the moment. But it is important to note that Taliban is not a homogeneous group. What NGOs and communities experience under Taliban ruling varies drastically from one community to the next. In addition, it should be noted that just because such verbal agreements are in place, our female colleagues, our female staff are still operating under a high degree of uncertainty and pressure. But nevertheless, they are very bravely continuing their work under extremely challenging and volatile circumstances. And while we have seen progress, many others continue to face difficulties. Thus, it is of paramount importance that we continue to engage collectively on this to ensure a coherent and joint approach towards what constitutes principled humanitarian action, and that we continue to provide support to local civil society actors, especially women's rights and women-led civil society organizations who are experiencing increasing pressure. As many of you know, the Danish Refugee Council activities in Denmark includes our integration and asylum work, which also involves engagement with and support to Afghan asylum seekers in Denmark and refugees, as well as the recent Afghan evacuees arriving in the wake of the Taliban takeover. In response to the draft bill presented in Parliament creating a special law to provide this group with a 2-year residence and work permit, DRC facilitated a process with the representative from the evacuees to comment on the draft bill and also shared our own comments. We have also conducted several information centers in asylum, information sessions in asylum centers around Denmark on this topic, which has been very well received. And then, lastly, DRC has also been supporting the role of the Afghan diaspora, some of being here today, and I hope and expect many of you sitting around here listening in, as transnational civil society actors since 2010 in your effort to contribute to relevant protection and solution outcome of people affected by conflict and displacement in Afghanistan, but also those on the move and those settling in Europe. We are witnessing the incredible Afghan diaspora mobilizing in response to the changing situation in Afghanistan. Within the DRC diaspora program, and we also have representatives here today, we are now fully mobilized to support these efforts in many ways and in the ways that may materialize, being it humanitarian project in Afghanistan, information provision to those seeking protection inside and outside Afghanistan, as well as mobilizing of the diaspora for advocacy, and especially for advocacy for rights of women and girls that are highly affected by this new reality in Afghanistan. So by these few opening remarks, I want to welcome all of you, and I look very, very much forward to the next couple of hours, and thanks again for organizing this event.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shanna Jensen, for shedding light on DRC, Danish Refugee Council's work and engagement in Afghanistan. I would now like to move on to the second opening remark by Ms. Rahela Sidiqi, founder and director of Governance and Reform Advisory Aid and Rahela Trust for Afghan Women's Education. The floor is yours.
Thank you, MP Samira Nawa. I'm privileged to be among our amazing panelists. Heartfelt thanks to the member of Danish Parliament and our partner DRC for facilitating these timely discussions, and to be able to talk about the ongoing devastating women's situation and lack of their access to their basic rights in Afghanistan. Let me give you some highlight about socioeconomic challenges of women in Afghanistan and in neighboring countries with my few recommendations. We know that 95% of populations don't have enough food, but also women aid workers are not able to have lots of challenges. For example, women in Badghis are not allowed, aid workers not allowed to go to work. In Daikundi and Bamiyan, they are just allowed to do the assessment, for example, and 11 provinces, they are just working in education and health sectors. So as a consequence, minorities, mostly Hazara, for example, and widows and disabled women and girls are struggling to survive inside and outside the home. Education, in the education sector, 2/3 of the girls and women, they are not able to go to school because of the poverty, displacement, and insecurity. And Taliban do not open the secondary school and university in majority of the provinces because they are waiting to introduce their new curriculums of teaching, cooking, household management, and religious subjects has a new curriculum for the women to study. Basically, Taliban are adding to the existing problems. They know that there is no enough female teachers and university lecturers, but they are also providing baseless, unfortunately, argument. So what we need to bring the other Islamic countries scholars to the table of negotiation to provide counter-argument and also disarm, basically, Taliban baseless argument. We know that there are so many of women in Afghanistan, women rights activists, women in volleyball, in handball. Like handball, Haid was killed, shot dead during the lunchtime in Jawzjan, when they took Jawzjan in May, and also in early October, head of volleyball team was beheaded, and a woman in Khost, a university student, young university student in economic faculty, she was shot dead in front of their home. And labor and social affairs, woman director of women affairs in Herat was shot dead, and 4 women in Mazar, journalists and women rights activists, was shot dead with another 2 women last week in Mazar, and police was killed at the middle of the night, female police, with 3 members of her family by the Taliban. Honestly, the list goes beyond, and there are many other categories they have been killed and thrown away in different places. Sexually abused of women have been increased. Women forced marriage, women early marriage are increased. The Attorney General Office, the female branch in the provinces are all closed. Police response units are closed. There are no female court that women address their issues in Afghanistan. Women in business, 57,000 women in business from small to big businesses, they are all at home. 75,000 of young girls who were educated, graduated, and they were trained by Promote, they are all at home. Women have been the backbone of the economic of Afghanistan, and they have been played a vital role in the process of development of Afghanistan, and why they are all at home. So, therefore, I suggest and I urge Denmark government to contribute to rescue these women of different categories, women at the grassroots level, from artists to journalists to sports people to low rank of the government employees. They are all vulnerable, unfortunately, so this evacuation process needs to be speedy. And also, I would recommend that the diaspora organizations should be supported technically and financially, because their increase in the platform of advocacy through different channels, to have one-to-one program, to have workshops, conferences, and also, honestly, support and capacity building and organization development to diaspora organization is critical at this moment of time for Afghanistan. I also suggest that the sophisticated and detailed mechanism of monitoring should be developed to monitor Taliban performance in the governance area and also in human rights performance. Finally, I would suggest that state leaders' knowledge and information building should include more direct engagement with the diaspora civil society leaders, because we were not part of the war, and we were also not engaged in peace negotiation, unfortunately. Like just today's program, where the Danish Parliament became the front runner in providing a space for Afghan women to highlight their issues and to share their issues with the meaningful dialogue with the Danish Parliament members. I will stop here, and many thanks once again for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rahela Sidiqi. And now let's move on to our four speakers. I have the pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Wahida Faizi, who will talk about the situation in Afghanistan for women and girls. And let me first of all introduce Ms. Wahida Faizi. Started working as a journalist and reporter and worked for different media outlets in Afghanistan since 2009. And Ms. Wahida has worked as gender coordinator with Afghan Journalists Safety Committee for the past 5 years. Prior to working as gender coordinator, she was a reporter for the radio Salam Watandar and Internews. In 2016, she received the Journalist of the Year award from the President and as a Best Reporter of the Year. Ms. Wahida Faizi, for your testimony on the situation in Afghanistan for women and girls.
Thank you so much. Hello to all members of the Parliament, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to discuss the problem of Afghan women and girls. First of all, let me thank Denmark for its humanitarian assistance to the people of Afghanistan over the last 20 years. Danish soldiers for their activity contribution to rescue operation in Afghanistan, and staff of the Danish embassies in Kabul and Islamabad for their good works for Afghan refugees. Thank you, people and government of Denmark. Let me start it from here. Afghan women had and still have beautiful dreams for their country and the world. They want a peaceful world free of violence. For the past 20 years, Afghan women have fought a lot for their rights. Fortunately, the past governments have respected women's rights, values, and freedoms as much as possible. We had problems, but not as we have it now. After the fall of Republic, the Islamic Emirate was established in Afghanistan. All the hard against achievements of Afghan women through the great struggles of Afghan women and international community were diminished to zero. At present, Afghan women do not have any rights defended within a framework of a law. They are facing many problems, but they are still fighting for their rights by launching demonstrations and campaigns, while facing physical abuse and repression by the Taliban. I worked as a journalist and women's rights activist in Afghanistan for 10 years. I have fought to be able to help myself and women of my country. I was one who started working the media under another name. I called myself to Rahela Faizi, but I didn't stop. I didn't give up. I did not give up. I traveled to provinces. I trained female journalists. The female journalist number was increasing day by day, and still we all hoped for a good future. Women journalists had lots of problems in the last 20 years, but have not given up their work. We have lost more than 20 female journalists in the 20 years, but they were killed by the Taliban. Currently, women journalists in Afghanistan have lost their jobs and they are facing many problems. Every day, I receive many messages from women journalists who have only one wish. Please help us to flee Afghanistan and live in a peaceful country. The Taliban have deep problems working with women and the idea of women. If women raise their voices against the Taliban, they are killed or beaten. Example of the target killing of women is in Mazar-e-Sharif, where 4 journalists and women activists were killed a few days ago. The Taliban not only respect women, they do not believe in human rights at all. They make new law for women that violated all human rights laws and international conventions. For example, in the new law of the Taliban, girls are not allowed to go to school and study after the 6th grade. Women do not have the right to work in government office or a right to travel without mahram. The Islamic Emirate removed the Ministry of Women Affairs and replaced it with their ministry. It was the only key ministry working for Afghan women at all of the government levels. Those who use it to high level of government position are no longer allowed to work, and everyone is still waiting to see what the Taliban will do there. Women police, judges, athletes, journalists, or women who working with international organizations are at serious risk. Even in some provinces, we witnessed that the female police officers were killed by the Taliban. The Taliban ideology has not only changed, but it has become more radical than the past. They know nothing about human rights, freedoms of expression, and women's rights to work. I hope the international community, the European Union, and especially the Danish Parliament will not forget Afghan women in this critical situation, and I hope that by all means to continue to support the Afghan women. In current situation, the Afghan people, especially Afghan women, need help more than ever. Please do not forget the Afghan women and Afghan people. Taliban should be appreciate their diplomatic means to stop their harsh and extreme law against women. They should not be recognized before women can enjoy their full rights. Until then, help to Afghan women and girls should be provided through international agencies to collaboration with the Afghan civil society. Once again, thanks a lot for this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wahida, for your insights and for sharing them with us here in the Danish Parliament. I should mention that we have On Teams also Ms. Fatma Öktem from the Liberal Party, Member of Parliament from the Liberal Party, and Karen Ellemann, Member of Parliament from the Liberal Party as well. And we have Eva Flyvholm, Ms. Eva Flyvholm, representing the Red Greens, and she's also a member of the Parliament. We will wait with the questions after hearing the rest of the speakers also. So I now will move on to introduce our second speaker, Mrs. Maryam Farzami. Ms. Maryam Farzami is a human rights activist and former communication and media manager at Afghanistan Independent Human Rights Commission. And she has contributed substantially towards defending women's rights in Afghanistan. The floor is yours, Ms. Maryam Farzami, to discuss the access to work and recreational activities for Afghan women.
Thank you so much, Samira Jan. I'm really honored and happy to be participating in this very important meeting about Afghan women today. And this view just reminded me of my office. Like, we were just celebrating the 20th years anniversary of establishing Human Rights Commission just a few months ago. And I remember at that day, I didn't have any fear. I was free. I could do anything I wanted to. And just this view reminded me of that day. As a woman in Afghanistan, I started working since February 2015 to August 2021. In this period of time, I could travel to anywhere I wanted to. I traveled to 16 provinces out of 34 provinces in Afghanistan. And I met a lot of young and educated and experienced women over there. I never thought that one day in this civilized and developed world in 2021, I will need somebody's permission to continue my work. I will be not allowed to go to my office anymore. Right at 15th August, while Taliban came to Kabul, and I realized that I cannot go to my office anymore. I cannot go to the beautiful cafes in Zohreh anymore. And it just broke me inside. It just shocked me a lot that I'm not having access to my very basic human rights anymore. You never know how eagerly I decorated my office and how happy I was because I was getting my promotion in 3 months, maybe in December. Yeah. And I can clearly see that I'm receiving everyday messages from the people in Afghanistan. And I can clearly see that a generation of Afghan women, they're experiencing a gradual death every day. This war in Afghanistan, it's not against any regime. It's not for power. I personally feel like this war is against Afghan women. This is how it is. Today I'm going to speak about the access to work and recreational activities for Afghan women in Afghanistan. Equitable access to work and leisure is a fundamental human right, recognized in all the international human rights documents. International charters and declarations have guaranteed that essential right for all human beings, regardless of their race, religion, language, or social status. Thus, the governing laws of Afghanistan, in accordance with the stated human rights documents, had also recognized the equal right for both men and women. As the right to full work is considered the basis for other rights and freedom, it is also a prerequisite for getting out of poverty and achieving to live a humanly and dignified life. Despite these facts, since the Taliban's grasp of power and under their regime, we observed the harsh restrictions and hard rules preventing Afghan women from access to their right to work. Taliban, in their very first action, closed the doors of the Ministry of Women Affairs and then made an announcement prohibiting and ordering stay at home for the Afghan women working with the government institution until further notice. Though this caused widespread reactions and protests by Afghan women in Kabul and other provinces, but yet, very unfortunately still, the very fundamental human right of working is still not given to the Afghan women in Afghanistan. Moreover, the Taliban has emphasized that the women are not allowed to go out, even for getting medical services, without a mahram, a male companion from their family, and hijab as their interpretation of the Sharia law. In another attempt, they have even banned women from entering the sport clubs, stadiums, parks, and even shrines. At present, women across Afghanistan are deprived of their fundamental right to work and leisure. And this has caused extensive poverty and other negative economic impacts in the lives of Afghan women, as the country has fallen into the hands of the Taliban. Further, the imposition of strict policies against Afghan women by the Taliban clearly shows that the Taliban not only doesn't honor their obligation to respect the fundamental rights and freedom of women, but the continuation of these draconian policies will further bring serious problems and challenges and make the situation worse for Afghan women. Women are also banned from attending amusement and religious places. Protection centers and safe shelters for women are also shut down. The women victims of violence do not have access to justice, and cases of violence against women are no longer being processed legally. Another statement by Taliban has banned women and men to work in the same place. Even though the Taliban have promised to consider women's rights, unofficial reports indicate that the Taliban members have been punishing women who had not been able to get a mahram while getting out of their house. However, the most horrendous of these barbarisms is the ban of education of schoolgirls of 7th grade and above. And a nation that fails to educate its children, both male and female, is not only a burden on itself, but the world as well. Today, while I'm here, I urge the leaders present here to not leave Afghanistan and its women alone. Afghan women have come a long way to gain access to their rights, to be hopeful for their future, and they have worked hard for their bright future. It is all in dust and ashes now, and we need your support more than ever to help us to gain our very basic human rights back. I have a recommendation here. The women in Afghanistan are representing the very essential part for the Afghan economy. Please engage with us as partners and not only the beneficiaries to ensure that we keep or regain the access to work for Afghan women. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Farzami, for sharing your experiences with us today. Thank you very much. And now let's move on to the third speaker. Let me introduce Ms. Mina Quame. She is a master's student of political science at University of Copenhagen and works at the Center for Security and Operation at the Danish Ministry of Defense. She's a member of the executive board and former vice chairperson at the NGO From Street to School, an NGO aiming to provide access to education for poor street children in Afghanistan. Ms. Mina Quame is also a member of the board at the Danish Afghan Women and Diaspora Forum, and for the past decade she has been involved in various diaspora organizations and humanitarian projects in Afghanistan. The floor is yours, Ms. Quame.
Thank you. First and foremost, I would like to express my gratitude to the members of the Danish Parliament's Committee on Gender Equality, Rahela Trust, and DRC Diaspora Program for this important initiative, for not forgetting Afghanistan, and for inviting us here today. The story of 8 orphaned children who starved to death took over social media a couple of weeks ago. Losing their bedridden father and grief-stricken mother meant they were left to fend for themselves on the street of Kabul, with the youngest just 2 years old. And hearing that people are being forced to do the unthinkable to feed their children by selling their babies makes the desperation and urgency of the situation hard to put into words. Already at the start of this year, Afghanistan was barely surviving before the Taliban took over. But now Afghanistan is facing one of the worst humanitarian crises in the world, actually the worst crisis in the world. Before 15th of August, half of the population in Afghanistan, 18.4 million people, were already in dire need for humanitarian assistance. These numbers are rising every day. In fact, 95% of the country right now face acute food insecurity. 23 million people are marching towards starvation, and considering the demographic development of the country, more than half of them are children below 18. The takeover already weakened an already fragile economy that was heavily dependent on foreign aid. Urban citizens, for the first time, suffer similar rates of food insecurity as to rural communities, a shifting pattern of hunger in the country. Afghanistan's economy was already suffering from very slow growth, high and increasing joblessness, poor governance, weak institutions, pervasive corruption, and not least COVID-19, climate change, and natural disasters such as droughts impacting the livelihoods of millions of people. Water and electricity services are failing, and food prices are rising every single day, which means ordinary people cannot afford the most basic necessities to survive. Meanwhile, more than 600,000 people were forced to flee their homes alone this year, contributing to more than 4 million people internally displaced in their own country. Most of them are living in tents, and with a harsh winter at our doorstep, considering that electricity and a roof over your head is a luxury, millions of Afghans will be forced to choose between migration and starvation, not to mention that most of them are at risk of freezing to death. The aid cutoff is devastating social services in Afghanistan. Basic health services are on the brink of collapse, with health facilities running out of medical supplies, no space for patients, and health workers going unpaid for several months. And unfortunately, as usual, women and children are paying the highest price. Just yesterday, I saw horrific footages from a maternity clinic with weak, starving babies and malnourished mothers. An entire generation fighting to stay alive, but 1/3 of the babies don't make it. At the same time, the financial system has collapsed completely. The freezing of the national reserves and the drying up for all types of aid has sent financial shockwaves in the country. Ordinary Afghans cannot withdraw their money, and let alone humanitarian organizations and NGOs still operating in the country. As a result, just like we witnessed some time ago, needy Afghan fathers commit suicide because they cannot provide for their families. The number of beggars on the streets is increasing rapidly. Small girls are married off in exchange for money and food. People are starving to death, and this is unfortunately only the top of the iceberg. For almost 2 decades, the Afghan diaspora have been active players in the development of their country of origin, whether acting individually or collectively. Together, we have found ways of mobilizing, fundraising, and moving millions of kroner from Denmark alone every single year, to sustain households, communities, schools, and hospitals through good times and bad, so we certainly do have a lot of capacity. We have been there when catastrophes happen and when the needy ones need us the most, and done everything from distributing relief aid to suffering families, providing education to poor children, offering access to clean water, building libraries, schools, and hospitals, as well as sending containers of school and hospital equipment, to mention but a few. With the fall of Kabul, we saw what dreams for a different Afghanistan fell falling too. But the younger generation clearly doesn't give in so easily. People are not ready to abandon their hopes and development after 20 years. Over the past few months, we have witnessed an incredible mobilization of youth, a mobilization we haven't seen before, and different kinds of initiatives. We have arranged protests and demonstrations, fundraising events, campaigns actively advocating for women's rights and democratic values. And while the Afghan diaspora was already deeply involved in humanitarian efforts for the past many years, countless new movements and initiatives were born in quest for a free, just, and peaceful Afghanistan. Trying to contribute amid the darkness has become a sort of a love letter to and for Afghanistan. After 15th of August, many diaspora organizations also had to adapt to new reality and reassess their areas of focus and approach to these new challenges. Girls in our program are suddenly unable to go to school, aid workers and local partners fear for their lives. The collapse of the financial sector makes it very difficult to transfer money. forcing many organizations to put activities and projects on hold, and an uncertain future makes it difficult to navigate. However, it is not only Taliban who is challenging our work. Banks' rigid control and requirements for documentation to avoid money laundering burden the small organizations threatening to take life of them. Most of the diaspora organizations face the same issue. They are unable to transfer money directly to Afghanistan, and many of them even had bank accounts shut down. Due to detailed and complex procedures, many banks completely opt out organizations as new customers as they simply take too much time, which means many diaspora organizations have suspended their projects temporarily until they find other solutions. Therefore, we urge the Parliament to recognize their central roles in creating environments within which smaller organizations can actualize their aspiration for development. The first step would be easing restrictions imposed on smaller NGOs and other organizations and help find mechanisms for them to be able to mobilize resources and contribute to the humanitarian response. And most importantly, we urge Denmark and the international community to continue providing extraordinary funding to meet the needs of the Afghan people in this time of crisis. It's vital to mobilize all possible international resources to rescue Afghanistan from an even worse humanitarian crisis. Because right now, we are on the countdown to a catastrophe, and it's only a matter of days before we have a total disaster on our hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Mina Quame, for sharing your experiences, and especially on the situation for the Afghan diaspora here in Denmark. Before we move on to the last speaker, I'll just let my colleagues know that after Ms. Zohreh Faizi's testimony, we will have questions. So if there is anybody on Teams who wants to ask questions or give comments on your testimonies, you can raise your hand out in space. But now let's move on to our last testimony. It's the fourth speaker, Ms. Zohreh Faizi, who is currently working within immigration and family law in Denmark. Moreover, Ms. Zohreh chairs the Afghan Lawyers Association in Denmark. The organization advocates for human rights, including gender equality in Afghanistan and abroad. And furthermore, Ms. Zohreh is a board member of Women Refugee Route, an NGO working to change the system of decision-making in migration policy by including refugee women in the process. Allow me to give the floor to Ms. Zohreh for a testimony on access to protection in Denmark.
Thank you, Ms. Samira Nawa and the previous panelists who have shed light on the difficult situation, especially for women and girls in Afghanistan. And I'm on this platform to address the current protection of women and girls in Afghanistan. Fellow advocates, members of parliament, and the Danish government. If I may be honest, this situation is not good. Following the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, Denmark evacuated around 950 Afghans in August, then submitted a proposal for a special law regarding these people. This could mean the permit would only last 2 years and cannot be extended. You're not protected under international law as when you have asylum. Almost everyone will end up applying for asylum as well, and it is confusing because it's extra administration. And it contains an unjust and arbitrary discrimination between families, especially those who happen to be evacuated and the ones who happen to be left. And I can go on. But, fellow advocate, is this all we can do? The reality of Danish authorities' response to Afghan women and girls' access for protection in Denmark, where is it? Let's see. The Danish authorities have been very conservative with access to protection for civilians from Afghanistan. Shockingly, even now in Denmark, the asylum process is on hold for Afghan applicants who have managed to be here when Afghan asylum seekers need protection more than ever now. Just observing the data alone, the asylum system tends to be gender-blinded, which means men get often stronger protection, such as refugee status, and women get weaker protection. In addition, according to the latest Danish Immigration Service statistical overview, Denmark has rejected around 50% of Afghan refugees' application for family reunification. In a number of cases that I personally have worked with, the children are the ones who are granted temporary residence permit without their mother. How is this possible? How can she be safe? With what we know about women in Afghanistan currently are there. With the knowledge that her husband, her family, her father, her brother are not there. She's alone and she's unprotected. Even UNHCR has directly urged Denmark to ease access to family reunification from Afghanistan and open quota refugee from Afghanistan due to the desperate situation. Fellow members of parliament, is this all what we can do? The criteria for family reunification is indeed tight and has a strict practice without dispensation. The Danish Immigration Service does not take into consideration the cultural difference between Afghanistan and Denmark, and often quickly decide that the marriage is not valid, that the Danish lack of cultural understanding and incorrect measure in these legal matters means that many families fail to correctly reunite it. The errors can be presentable or preventable, but are usually identified as pro forma, forced marriage, incorrect translation of marriage certificate. I can provide many examples, but one of the most confusing cases I have worked with, imagine, or just picture this. My client, who has 9 children with her spouse in Denmark, cannot grant family reunification from Afghanistan because the Immigration Service does not recognize the marriage, which is from 1989. Despite the fact that 4 of her children lives now in Denmark with her spouse, and she's also willing to do a DNA test to prove that they are her children. In all these situations, justice requires cultural understanding, flexibility, and quick actions. But first, we need to give access to Denmark. How can it be that to get to safety, one must reach safety? But in this case, they cannot even reach to safety because Denmark has closed the borders. So then how can they get to safety? Government of Denmark, is this all we can do? As the situation in Afghanistan is unstable, Government of Denmark, members of parliament, and advocates of justice, how can we collectively make a concrete action plan for Afghan civilians who are here on their way to Denmark or on their way to Denmark? For the share of the responsibility Denmark bears in justice, Denmark needs to recognize its responsibility toward Afghan women and girls following the departure from Afghanistan and offer protection to a larger group of Afghans at risk through evacuation and resettlement. We also urge you to ease family reunification for those who are already in Denmark and provide educational opportunity, for example, through student visa. Because we all are sitting here, and we all are sitting here for one cause, that is to fight for justice and equality. And we all believe, her I Danmark, med lov skal man land bygge. This is it. The only thing is left to act. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Faizi. Some of your message was addressed to the Danish government. Unfortunately, today we do not have a representative from the Danish government, but several members of the parliament. Now it's time for the questions from members of parliament. And as I mentioned, we have some with us on Teams. And first of all, it's Bertel Haarder from the Liberal Party having a comment or question. Værsgo, Bertel.
My question is very brief. How can we help girls and women in Afghanistan without helping the Taliban? I think that's the dilemma we are facing. Thank you.
So how can we help women and girls without also helping the Taliban is the dilemma. Anybody who wants to respond? Ms. Rahela Sidiqi?
I think there are ways of multilateral approach that the aid should go to Afghanistan. Humanitarian assistance should continue to Afghanistan because we have the populations that they are in need. But that could be done through multilateral channel, through international NGOs and also national NGOs, in partnership with national NGOs and charitable organizations and private sectors in Afghanistan, and also in collaboration with diaspora organizations around the EU countries. There has to be, aid has to be channeled in Afghanistan. And the systems, as colleagues said, the systems of financial transfers systems needs to be discussed among the governments and find some solutions for it, that the many transactions could go to Afghanistan, is in Afghanistan. And diaspora, honestly, remittance has been very much supportive to the Afghan situations. So those channels needs to be open and should be facilitated by the governments. Yeah, anyone to add?
Anybody else wants to? Ms. Mina Quame?
I just wanted to add, I completely agree with you. And supporting civil society actors in Afghanistan is very important, because what we see right now, organizations like, for example, PenPal in Afghanistan are going door to door, from village to village, from city to city, trying to negotiate with elders of each village in order for giving girls and women access to work and education. And just wanted to add, earlier we have seen the UN corridors being established in order to for humanitarian assistance to access the most needy areas, and that's what I think we can do this time too. I think the negotiations right now is mostly focused on whether or not the aid is gonna legitimize Taliban, but I definitely believe we can provide aid without legitimizing Taliban and contribute to avoid this humanitarian crisis without legitimizing the Taliban.
Thank you. And we have a comment or question from Eva Flyvholm now. Værsgo, Eva.
Yes, thank you so much to all the speakers for your presentations. It's obviously a very serious and heartbreaking situation we're facing. I have two comments on, one, the financial system that three of you touch on, and I think that's a very crucial thing to be attentive towards. I posed some questions to the government, the Minister of Development on this, but I would also like to urge the other parliamentarians to raise this issue with their other spokespersons in their parties, because I know that, for instance, right now in the Cultural Committee, there's going to be samråd in 2 weeks about this matter. And one of the things that I think is very important to raise is also to secure that the more internationally based organizations actually will get access to bank accounts and making transfers. So I would really urge you to coordinate with your spokespersons on culture and also development on this issue. I very much agree that this is a crucial matter, and it's not being brought together in a proper way at the moment. So that's also one of the things that we're experiencing. So just a comment on that, and I hope we can all try to work together to improve this issue, because obviously it's a big problem. And the other thing is, in terms of giving visa access to people, I very much agree that that's also a key question, of course, for and also providing spaces for refugees. We have had a situation where we also were about to evacuate at least a few more NGO people that would have been mainly human rights activists, mainly women, and unfortunately Venstre, Conservative, and the Social Democrats changed their mind in the last minute, so we could not manage to get this agreement through to evacuate more people. And I would also like to ask the other parliamentarians to raise these issues in their parties and see if we could have another go at that. I think it's a very, very important question also to keep working to evacuate also some of the human rights activists and women that are now in danger. So that would be two things, but thank you so much for your presentations. And just one question on how do you see that the Danish government and I know 8 organizations are also asking for women to be more included in the work, but how do you see the Danish government could raise this demand clearly towards the Taliban? And are there any particular initiatives you would like us to try to support? Because this is obviously very important to raise this demand at the moment also. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, Ms. Rahela.
I think what the Danish government can do to push the Taliban to put conditions. And the conditions that if there is, as colleagues said, if there is no full human rights, women rights implemented in Afghanistan, if there is no good governance, I'm just talking about even governance in Taliban situations, in Taliban regime, let alone to talk about the good governance. So there has to be push and putting conditions and legitimacy. I mean, recognition of Taliban regime would be a big question mark in the history of the different countries' actions. So this is one thing. The other thing is, honestly, as a mother, when she was speaking, I was remembering my children, that how they were suffering when I was experienced during the past time of the Taliban, and my home was attacked when I was 4 months pregnant. So I was remembering that how low my children was. We have to really see also, governments need to see the root cause of the problems. And what is actually the root cause of these problems? Are we going to see those who are called and named and or in the blacklist as a terrorism to continue? Or we are not touching the root cause of the problems? Because today Afghanistan is unfortunately in the hand of the terrorism. And the citizens and the populations are suffering. And as a mother, as a woman, as a human, as an activist, it's a big question mark in the history of this time of the history of the world. So with these questions, maybe we have to see that the Denmark government to raise a little bit difficult questions like I raised, and also to put conditions. on Talibans, and to push them that human rights in this time of the history is not something that you ignored. More than half of the population of the country, women, that they have been contributing to the development process of Afghanistan, and they are more important than the Taliban. They have to understand that they cannot ignore, and women cannot go back. So this is the dilemma and argument that I think the government of Denmark should push Taliban. Yeah, if my colleague has something to add, or.
And then I have a question myself also, because several of you mentioned the gender-based violence, the early marriages, the forced marriages. But as we also know, it was a problem before the August of 15 as well. So I would like to know if you know, has it increased, and how much has it increased? Because for me, showing human rights, women's rights, that would be indicators on how well is a country doing on human rights, on girls' rights, on women's rights. So if I don't know if any of you have the numbers on how was it before and how was it now, or can elaborate a bit on that.
I will say something, but you can also add. I think, yes, Afghanistan women were facing violence, and Afghanistan was one of the worst countries also for women to live in Afghanistan. But looking to the present situation, as Maryam John and everyone other, my young generation said, this is a shocking time, and this is a shocking for this generations that they have not practiced these kind of being locked at home. This is a new experience for them, and this is a new suffering. And this generation are not the generations that it was 20 years before. They are very intellectual. They have a knowledge, and the majority of the young girls who were in school and at the universities, they know their rights. And you know that their restrictions and all these things did not stop them, and they went on the street. In this very difficult times, the Taliban, the gun was on their head, and they were shot dead in many. We don't know in many cases that, and I'm in contact with some of those women who have been chased up after being on the street. So yes, the forced marriage increased. Yes, the child marriage increased, and yes, there are so many of the areas that have been closed. What we can do, I think, more investment on education, more investment on economic development, more investment also for those who have been displaced like them. And not only in the European countries, they are in a much better safe side. But what about the neighboring countries? Honestly, I'm hearing every day 7 to 10 cry from Turkey, from Tajikistan, from inside Afghanistan. And I have a little organization that I provide for 30 people in the last 2 months work in Afghanistan and also in Turkey, but that needs to be increased. So support to the neighboring countries for women, also speedy situations to those who are in a neighboring country, because they just run away. They didn't have anything, and they don't have access to economic and to education. So there are so many concerns that is there among the very crowded and flood of refugees around the countries, and also many crises and violence inside Afghanistan, which how can I say? There are too much to speak about it, but let's stop here and then if my colleague has anything to add, they can add. I'm so distressed, honestly. I'm so distressed.
Ms. Maryam, would you like to add?
That's quite obvious, actually. If you deprive, like imagine a society with 10,000 people, with not having educated girls or women. What could have happened to that society with 10,000 people? But now we are talking about Afghanistan, a country with 35 million people. If you deprive women from education, it's really clear that they will no longer know about their rights. While they don't know about their rights, the violence against women will be increased. And right now in Afghanistan, as I mentioned, that the violence against women are no longer being processed legally, the cases. There's no shelters, there's no safe houses for the women. The women who have been in safe houses and shelters in Afghanistan, they have been sent to the prison in Pulcharhi. If there's a violence against women, there's a case, nobody can go and talk about it with somebody because there's no one who can listen to the women in Afghanistan. It clearly shows that the violence is increased and increasing day by day. Thank you.
I just wanted to add, we should also remember that COVID-19 has been there for 2 years. And what we have seen during COVID-19, or since it escalated, the gender-based violence increased rapidly due to men losing jobs, due to women not being or girls not being able to go to school, and so on and so on. And that's why, actually, yesterday I read that 8 in 10 Afghan women are experiencing gender-based violence, and they're experiencing it during their lifetime. So I could only imagine how much it has been rising right now as an aftermath of COVID-19, even though it's not really an aftermath yet.
Yeah.
I think also the media needs to be investment on the media, that there should be, because journalists are moving out from the countries, either international media, researchers, and local media. Really, the Taliban needs to be pushed to allow the media to have evidences. There are so many places that there's no evidences by the media, but there are active observers, neighbors, that they know what is happening. But when you come to say that this is the fact, it says that, oh, but there has to be verified. Mm-hmm. So we have to see alternative approach, how we can really see. The other day I was in a meeting with the ICC judges, and I said, how this record of the victims of war can be explicitly out, that what happened to this 15 member of the family who died, who is going to compensate them? And there are so many cases to talk about. So media investment.
As you said, Mina Quame, due to the COVID, I mean, even in Denmark, the gender-based violence has increased because families are staying at home. It was just a comment. I have one more question, because some of you also mentioned the Ministry of Women Affairs and that it has been removed. And I would like you to elaborate on what the Ministry of Women Affairs, which cases it took up, and what work did it do before it was removed. Thank you.
I think, as far as I know, that Minister of Women Affairs, they had elimination of violence against women unit. They had human rights unit. They had different solicitors that they were advocating for the right of women. There was so much coordination and cooperation for gender policies and 1325 to be implemented and monitored by the different departments of the government. That was another area that they were looking after, and also they were monitoring the gender unit around the different ministries in 42 ministries and agencies in Afghanistan. and the performance of the recruitment. There were so many things that they were collaborating and coordinating in terms of policy implementation by ministries and agencies. But those are unfortunately, and they were also providing economic support to women through collaboration with different charities, charitable organizations in Afghanistan. They were providing funds to different organizations. But those are all unfortunately stopped, those activities.
Thank you very much. And just the last chance for my colleagues on Teams, if there are any comments or questions, now is the time. I think members of parliament have all given their comments and asked our questions, and also the time is running. So allow me to thank you all for joining us. And now I would like to ask Ms. Rahela Sidiqi to share her closing remarks.
Thank you to all our panelists. First of all, to MP Samira Nawa, to Shanna Jensen, to Wahida Faizi, to Maryam Farzami, to Mina Quame, to Zohreh Faizi, and our other respected members of the Danish Parliament for their valuable insight, and to each and every one of you for joining us. Let me share some 4 key takeaways from this panelist. Denmark needs to recognize its responsibility towards Afghan women and girls following the departure from Afghanistan, and offer protections to a large group of Afghans at risk through evacuation and resettlement, ease family reunification for those in Denmark, and provide educational opportunities for Afghan women. Taliban should be incentivized, sorry for my English, through diplomatic means to stop their harsh and extreme law against women. They should not be recognized before a woman can enjoy their full rights. Until then, aid to Afghan women and girls should be provided through international agencies in collaboration with the Afghan civil society. Women represent an essential part of the economy. Please engage with us as partner, not as a beneficiary, to ensure that we keep or regain access to work. We urge Denmark to continue to provide extraordinary funding to meet the needs of Afghans in this time of crisis. Please also help find a mechanism for diaspora in Denmark to send money and contribute to the humanitarian responses. Today, women in Afghanistan are at the mercy of the Taliban, and Afghan women in the diaspora are struggling to help them. We hope that these discussions will help strengthening the relations between the Afghan diaspora women and the Danish Parliament, and that we will be able to continue discussing this important topic. I now hand over to a member of the Danish Parliament, to our dear Samira Nawa, for her closing remark.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rahela. And thank you as well on behalf of the Danish Parliament's Committee on Gender Equality to our fantastic panelists, Mrs. Wahida Faizi, Ms. Maryam Farzami, Ms. Mina Quame, and Ms. Zohreh Faizi. Thank you very much for giving your recommendations, for sharing your views, and I'm sure that I'm speaking on behalf of all of us that we have listened, and some of the points that I personally take with me is the fact about how women and girls' rights are right now being suppressed even more than before in Afghanistan. The banking situation is also a problem, and of course, in general, Afghanistan needs to be spoken about when Afghans are in Afghanistan or evacuated and are coming here to Denmark. I would like also to say that the Danish Refugee Council, they will prepare a report about this event, and it will be available on the Danish Refugee Council's diaspora program and on Rahela Trust websites and Facebook pages. Thank you very much for the cooperation on establishing this event. Thank you very much also to all of those who were streaming this event on the TV.